Hey everyone, you've made it to day 9 of Vlogmas. I'm Eric Byrne. We're going to jump right into it. Welcome to day 9. Before we get into it, I have to go take care of one important thing. Be right back. Have to be official. There we go. There you go. Now the front yard looks perfect. Today I was going to pick up on a previous topic that I left hanging due to the length of the video, and that was to talk about how I transitioned from high school into architecture school, eventually went to study abroad in France, and then got out in the world. Anyway, picking up where we left off, I made it to University of Illinois to study architecture, and the freshman year, the weeder year, was pretty tough. They also used the freshman year to kind of weed out those people that really didn't have the fortitude to go through architecture. It's sometimes surprising to people to understand or learn how much work actually goes into architecture. The best description, briefest description I can come up with is that architecture is the most technical of the arts. So it seems to have the laid-back attitude of being artistic, but you have to have the exactitude, the workable, functional aspect that something actually has to function. It actually has to work in the real world. It can't be imaginary. So you kind of have to balance the two aspects to produce a good design. Again, that was something that I enjoyed because it made it real. It made it an item a person could experience. Going from there, the first year was a learning curve, got up to the speed of university architecture classes, and it was fun actually. Again, you're getting a lot of your electives out of the way. In fact, one of the electives I chose was in the sort of the social sciences, where it was like geography, and that was really cool. They gave us a selection, but that's a foreshadowing of things to come. But needless to say, I started on that track to satisfy some of my electives. When we started getting close to our junior year, we all started sort of reviewing, can we actually make it to Versailles, France? Because they would actually take about 2/3 of the class, about 45 students from the junior year, and would basically transport us to Versailles. That was a logistics, I'll say a conundrum. But needless to say, I did qualify for the program. I actually had to take some summer school to get some calculus out of the way, and got my grades off to the board. They okayed me with about 2 weeks to go. So I luckily had my luggage ready to go, and with 2 weeks out, got the okay, and I was on a plane to France with a lot of my friends. We landed in Paris and had a challenging, exciting, frustrating, amazing year. Everything mixed up together. It really was an eye-opener. It's something I wish everyone could do. Studying abroad, especially for an entire year, makes you amazingly self-sufficient. Not that speaking French or going to Europe or navigating a map or learning how to work the train system or barely making it home after a movie from downtown Paris to the suburbs of Versailles. Those are little components that all mix together to make everything that was my experience in France so rewarding. Of course, we went to multiple sites around Europe, did multiple sketch exercises, traveled everywhere, and did a lot of serious study. It was essentially the same curriculum as you would find at University of Illinois. A side note is, in order to actually have classes in the facilities there at France, we actually had to apply and be accepted to the École des Beaux-Arts. And that was interesting because not only do we have to meet entrance and grade requirements for the U of I, plus the requirements to go on the study abroad, but we also had to meet the École des Beaux-Arts requirements. So it was like 3 tiers higher than normal. A lot of us like, whoa, just made it, it seemed. But it was amazing. I wish everyone could do it, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. Later on, I'll try to share some images or photography from my trips around Europe. I always like talking about it because it really was such a eye-opening and character-changing time in my life. So I made it back to the States and finished out my senior year. And during that year, my senior year, I discovered that based on the electives and the elective track that I had chosen 3 years prior, I was going to fall just a little bit short on my electives because the university had a very restricted list of classes I could take that would still fit into my senior year. So one of the classes that did fit and did satisfy the prerequisite and elective requirements was the library science class. And so I thought, well, that's very interesting. Matter of fact, the architectural registration exam had used a library design as part of its charrette. So I thought, well, that'll be nice. I mean, in case they have something like that again, I'll learn more about libraries. And I had been in class about a month when I ran into Jennifer. And that's where I met my wife, was in library science class. The interesting thing is that class was a graduate level class, and I actually had to get special permission to take a graduate level class while still an undergrad. They allowed it because I had a conflict with the schedule. It's one of those little stipulations you see at the bottom with an asterisk or something saying, oh, well, under these circumstances you can take it. But they reviewed my grades, the fact that I'd gone to the foreign study program. They said, yeah, we think you can handle it. So it's a good thing because I met my future wife there. Well, upon graduation, I then decided where did I want to go to graduate school. And it turned out that staying on at the University of Illinois actually worked out very well because they had a very good program that basically concentrated your attention on practice. Another aspect that they had was an agreement with the civil engineering school where you could get a parallel master's degree in civil engineering. There was some crossover between the majors, but if you took a heavy class load as well as a very dense summer school, you could get parallel master's degrees in civil engineering and in architecture. Two separate, not dual, but separate degrees. And a group of us, a group of about 5 or 6 guys, all said, you know what, I think we're all going to try that. So we formed this little club, and we struck out, and over the next 2.5 years, we actually satisfied the requirements for a Master's of Civil Engineering and the Master's of Architecture at the U of I. It was great to have this group of guys because we all moved through and took care of the requirements, kind of worked off if one of us had a problem with an assignment or we were trying to understand some aspect, we kind of backed each other up. Unfortunately, upon graduating from graduate school, it was 1994, and the economy was just starting to pick up from the doldrums of 91, 92. So we looked around for jobs in the Midwest, and we reviewed different cities, looked at Chicago, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Kansas City, and it turns out that the strongest job market at the time was in Kansas City. So I sent some resumes, and I was able to coordinate 3 basically interviews for the same weekend, and my wife and I drove all the way to Kansas City from central Illinois, about 8 hours at the time, and I sat through the 3 interviews and got an offer at all 3. I went with the one that seemed to have the most exposure and was the most like a typical office, basically the stuff I had studied in grad school. And as I say, the rest is history. Again, Kansas City was a lot like my hometown of Indianapolis, so it felt very similar. I wouldn't say the same, but it had a similar size. The geography was comparable, and it wasn't too far afield. It wasn't like going to the West Coast or the East Coast. It was still the Midwest, although a little more Western at the time. Once I had a job and we were in Kansas City and we were becoming, a married couple in a rental house, we had to focus on like what's the next big thing. And for me, that was getting registered as an architect passing the architectural registration exam. At the time, and continuously into today, that entails partaking in the intern development program, or the IDP, and that sets up a minimum number of hours in different categories of work exposure, so that when a person finally sits for the exam, they can combine their knowledge, their work experience, their exposure to different aspects of being an architect, and when they become registered, you know that you've got a minimum level of capability. It's a grueling test, and at that time, it was a paper test where you would sit all day, and you would have a day where you actually designed a building per a set of criteria that they would set forth. And you never knew what it was, but you would put in this marathon session to design a building. And there was also a paper test portion that went along with that. The pass-fail rate, if you step away and look at it, is rather abysmal. Most people then were only passing somewhere in the 40% of test takers, give or take. Some years were better, some years were worse, and the average was somewhere in the 40% range. I do know that there was one year, because of just the nature of the test, they only had a pass rate of like 27%. So you can see a lot of your future was tied up in this. And of course the test was only offered essentially once a year. They had an off cycle too. But it was a big thing because it meant that you were a registered architect. So I spent the next while satisfying my intern development program hours, and dozens of hours go into it, and you finally report those hours back to a central recording agency, and they tally it up and they finally say, yes, you qualify to sit for the exam. Well, it turns out that over the years a lot of people had problems with the architectural registration exam, and there had been a push to computerize it, to make it more modern, and also to break it up into components that you can take over a span of time instead of it all being in essentially one shot, which was great. Well, it was unfortunate because the year they switched from paper to computer was the year I was going to take the test. And so I could have taken the test in 1997, but that was the year they switched it. And so you couldn't really take the test, and I had to wait several months until they actually got the computer centers set up. When they finally did, I was one of the first persons to sign up in the testing center here in Kansas City, and studied up and applied for the first section, one of the computer sections, and crossed my fingers and I dove right in. I'll cut to the chase. It was a grueling test. Not so much in the content, but you were having to negotiate a computer system which was deliberately neutral. It wasn't like AutoCAD, it wasn't like MicroStation, it wasn't like one of the systems that was out there. And the creators of the test did that deliberately so that there was a sort of an even playing field. So it was this other system. Anyway, I passed all the sections the first time through. And that first test session, which I was part of, they had just rolled it out, as you can imagine, had an abysmal passing rate. So that's a little feather in my cap, is that I actually passed it straight through the first time. I think the pass rate was somewhere down in the maybe low 30s, possibly the high 20s. So kudos to me. Now I know a few people have been asking, or maybe thinking it now, what was my wife doing during all this time? Well, she came to Kansas City with me because I was the first one to land a job. Ironically, she got a job offer in Minneapolis, St. Paul about 2 weeks after we arrived here. So we waited out and we stayed put, and she actually picked up some part-time work at a music studio, which eventually evolved into a home studio, and she now teaches voice and piano at our home in a studio that I set up for her. Basically designed it when we put an addition on the house that we live in now. Well, we've made it up to my working in Kansas City, my wife working at home, and I'll add more, but I don't want the video to run long. So I'll stop it here, and we'll pick it up another day of Vlogmas. Thanks, guys! Hey, do you want to learn more about what we're doing here in Kansas City? Do you want to learn more about Kansas City? Well, go ahead and add comments down below. I'll read through them, see if there's things I can pick out and share with you in the future. Thanks a lot, guys. A little bit of bonus information. At the time that I took the architectural registration exam, the computer test had only just been released. So when I went to the local AIA, or American Institute of Architects office chapter, as they call it, they had almost no study material for the actual computerized test. They had just heaps of information for the paper version, but almost nothing for the computer test. And the computer test was radically different. The categories were shifted around, they added categories, and you took it in multiple pieces. It also cost a lot more. So really, unfortunately, the AIA wasn't much help at the time. Now if you go, they have copious amounts of study material. So when I took the test originally, I was double handicapped, and the fact that I passed is a testament to the University of Illinois. I give a lot of credit to them. Thanks, U of I.